Welcome to Shad's Guitar Show. Whether it's the gear or the players who made the gear famous, join me each episode as we discuss all things guitar. Well, hey there everybody, and welcome into another exciting episode of Shad's Guitar Show. As you just heard, new bumper, and I just thought I'd mix it up a bit. I know I've changed it several times since the show started, but I really dig this one and probably keep it around for a little while. I did a poll on Instagram about a couple of different pieces of music I wrote with the intention of potentially being the new bumper, and this is the one everybody seemed to like the most, so there it is. All right, so today we're going to get into a topic that I think a lot of people potentially misunderstand, or they think they want one over the other just based on what the general consensus is. And maybe the general consensus isn't even that informed, but, we romanticize, as we talked about in the last episode, about bass players and forward thinking and guitars thinking vintage minded. I think this kind of falls into the same category. So what I wanted to do today is kind of dive into the topic of nitrocellulose finishes versus polyurethane, more modern finishes. We're going to talk about what each one is and sort of why you might want one over the other. And I think a lot of times people just automatically assume, oh, nitro, you got to have nitro because it's vintage and that's what they did in the old days. But remember, like many other things from the golden era old days, they used nitrocellulose lacquer because that's all there was. It wasn't like they chose that for any specific purpose other than that's what was plentiful and available and they could get their hands on. So that's what they used. It wasn't with tone in mind. It wasn't with the way the finish would age in mind. Any of the things that we think about now, it was purely, hey, this is what's available and this is what we're going to use. So with that in mind, let's dive into a discussion on the differences between nitrocellulose and polyurethane finishes. All right, let's start with a little history because context matters. Nitrocellulose lacquer, or just nitro as everybody calls it these days, has been around since the early 20th century. It was the finish of choice for most American guitar makers from the 1930s through the 1960s. Your vintage Gibsons, your pre-CBS Fenders, those legendary instruments were sprayed with nitro. So when people talk about the golden era of guitar making, they're talking about guitars that are wearing a nitrocellulose lacquer finish. Now, polyurethane, on the other hand, came into widespread use in the guitar industry in the 1970s and 80s, when manufacturers were looking for a finish that was more durable, faster to apply, and cheaper to produce at scale. And it delivered on all those fronts. So right away, we can see why this debate carries so much emotional weight. It's not just chemistry. It's tied up with nostalgia, craftsmanship, and the ongoing conversation about what makes a great guitar. Okay, so let's break down what these things actually are. Nitrocellulose lacquer is what chemists call a solvent release coating. You dissolve the lacquer solids in a solvent, historically things like acetone or lacquer thinner. Spray it on, and as the solvent evaporates, you're left with a thin, hard film. Here's the key thing. The film never fully cures in the chemical sense. It stays somewhat reactive. You can redissolve it with fresh solvent, which makes it incredibly repairable. A ding, a crack, a checking line. A skilled luthier can melt fresh nitro right into the old nitro and blend it almost invisibly. Now, polyurethane, by contrast, is a catalyzed or cross-linked finish. When you spray it, it's a chemical reaction that happens. The molecules bond together in a rigid interlocking network. And once it's cured, it's essentially inert. It won't redissolve. It won't react with fresh coats in the same way. So what you get is an incredibly tough, glossy, impermeable shell. So two very different approaches, and each one has real consequences for how the guitar looks, plays, feels, and some would argue, sounds. All right, so let's dive into some of the reasons why you might want one finish versus another. And let's give Nitro its due first, because the case for Nitro is genuinely compelling. Reason 1, it's thin. A proper Nitro finish is applied in many light coats, and because the solvent flashes off so completely, you end up with very little actual material left on the wood. We're talking sometimes just a few thousandths of an inch. That matters because guitar tops, especially on acoustic guitars and hollow or semi-hollow electrics, need to vibrate freely. A thick, hard shell can dampen that resonance. Nitro applied well lets the wood really do its thing. Reason 2, it breathes and ages. Nitro is not fully impermeable. Over decades, it continues to off-gas, to shrink slightly, to react to humidity and temperature. This is why old Nitro guitars develop checking, those beautiful spiderweb cracks in the finish, and why the color shifts and yellows over time. A lot of players and collectors find this genuinely gorgeous. It's the guitar living. It's a document of its history. Reason 3, repairability. I already touched on this a bit, but it deserves its own moment. If you damage a Nitro finish, a good tech can fix it in a way that's essentially invisible. There's a big deal for collectors and working musicians who want to maintain the value and appearance of a fine instrument. Reason 4, the feel. Many players report that Nitro feels different under the hand, more organic, slightly warmer to the touch. Whether that's the finish itself or simply the thinness of it letting you feel more of the wood is debatable, but the experience is real to a lot of people. And reason 5, the vibe. Look, to be honest, if you're playing a vintage reissue, a boutique custom build, or a high-end American-made guitar, and it has a thin Nitro finish, that means something. It signals a commitment to the traditional craft. It puts you in the lineage with the instrument that defines the sound of American music. That's not nothing. So let's talk about polyurethane, because poly has real legitimate advantages, and dismissing it as cheap is way too simple. Reason 1, durability. Poly is tough. It resists scratches, dings, and general abuse of gigging life far better than Nitro. If you're playing 300 shows a year, loading and unloading a van, leaving your guitar in a case in the back of a bar, poly is going to protect that instrument better, no question. Reason 2, consistency and stability. Because poly cures to a chemically stable state, it doesn't check, it doesn't shrink, and it doesn't yellow unevenly. If you want your sunburst to look exactly the same in 20 years as it does today, poly is definitely your friend. For players who see aging as damage rather than character, this is a major plus. Reason 3, moisture resistance. Poly forms a nearly impermeable barrier. That's important for protecting the wood from humidity swings, especially in challenging climates. A guitar finished in poly is, in some ways, better insulated from environmental stress. Reason 4, cost and production efficiency. For manufacturers building guitars at volume, poly finishes can be applied quickly, cured under UV lamps in minutes, and don't require the multiple thin coats and lengthy cure times as Nitro does. This helps keep production costs and therefore retail prices manageable. Some very excellent guitars at mid-range price points wear poly finishes, and there's no shame in that. And reason 5, modern poly can be applied thin. This is where the conversation has evolved in recent years. The old criticism of poly was that it was way too thick and plasticky, and historically, that was often true. But modern finishing technology has improved dramatically. Skilled builders are now applying polyurethane and polyester finishes that rival Nitro in thickness. The poly always kills resonance argument is less and less true when the work is done right. Alright, so where does that leave us? Here's my honest take. The finish debate is real, but it's also sometimes used as a proxy for deeper conversations about quality, tradition, and what we value in an instrument. Nitro is not magic. A poorly built guitar with a Nitro finish is still a poorly built guitar. And a superbly crafted instrument with a thin poly finish can be remarkable, resonant, and a beautiful thing. What's true is the intention matters. A builder who chooses Nitro is usually making a deliberate choice about aesthetics, playability, repairability, and a connection to tradition. A builder who chooses poly is often making a deliberate choice about longevity, consistency, and performance under real-world conditions. And neither answer is wrong. And at the end of the day, the right finish is the one that serves you, your playing, and your relationship with your instrument. All right, before we wrap up, a quick practical note for anyone who has both types of guitars in their collection. And this is important. Do not store a nitro finished guitar in contact with a poly finished case interior or vice versa. The solvents in the nitro can react with certain plastics and synthetic materials. Keep your nitro guitars in period appropriate cases or with good quality cloth, separating the finish from anything synthetic. Your favorite nitro equipped guitar will absolutely thank you for this. All right, so where do you fall in this discussion? Do you have guitars that are both polyurethane finish and nitrocellulose finishes? Are you a nitro only guy? Do you see no value in the nitro and you want poly on everything because you want your guitars to look brand new in perpetuity and forever? I'm curious to know, so make sure to leave me a comment about what you like and why. Also, wherever you're listening right now, take a minute to give me a 5-star review. That would be incredibly helpful, and I'd appreciate it in advance. Also, next time you're on YouTube, head over to Shad's Guitar Show. Make sure you're subscribed. And also, when you're on Instagram, follow the show, Shad's Guitar Show on Instagram. I want to be able to connect with you guys on all these platforms. And I really appreciate the support and you coming along for the ride. And as I always say, if you keep listening, I'll keep talking all things guitar.